In this module, we shall be discussing about climate change. Particularly, we will discuss about mitigation strategies. After studying this module, you would be able to learn about the efficacy of mitigation and coping strategies adopted at the international level to fight climate change. We would be able to understand the mechanism for GHG emissions abatement under the Kyoto Protocol and know about other coping strategies and initiatives. We shall commence this module by studying the need for multilateral participation to counter climate change. Climate change is a phenomenon which affects the entire globe. Therefore, it is important, it is necessary to have multilateral participation. Reduction in the global emissions to prevent climate change reinforces the need for broad cooperation at the multilateral level. No single country is responsible for more than 26% of the global emissions, while 15 to 20 countries are responsible for about 75% of the global emissions, but the impact of climate change are felt the world around. Hence, the efforts to adapt to climate change have to be global as well. Now let us discuss the Kyoto Protocol. In 1992, there was the Rio Earth Summit, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, which is a protocol to the International Framework Convention on Climate Change with the aim of reducing greenhouse gases, was adopted in December 1997. It was an effort to prevent the anthropogenic climate change. What do we mean by anthropogenic? Anthro relates to human beings and anthropogenic is from human causes. Therefore, it was agreed that climate change is a phenomenon which is caused by human beings, by the human population. So, the protocol directed the developed countries to reduce GHGs, as you are aware, greenhouse gases, which are very harmful to the environment, by a global average of 5.2% below the 1990 levels during the period from 2008 to 2012. This was the target that was set for the developed countries. National binding range from 6% for Japan, 8% for the EU, and for some other countries to 7% and 0% for Russia. It was common but a differentiated responsibility. That means that this is a collective responsibility, but according to the levels of emissions, different countries were given certain target levels which they had to reduce. The participant signatory countries had set designated national authorities to administer their GHG portfolios. By May 2008, 182 parties had endorsed and ratified the protocol. The only developed country that doesn't ratify the treaty is the United States of America. The Kyoto Protocol includes present commitments to limit emissions only from developed countries and with non-inclusion of the United States, and has no meaningful penalties for non-compliance. Developing countries had no obligation beyond the emission monitoring and emission reporting. The 38th country to be a signatory of the convention is India. As on 1st of November 1993, the IPCC has forecasted a global rise in the temperature of to the tune of 1.4 degrees centigrade or 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit up to 5.8 degrees centigrade or 10.4 degrees Fahrenheit between the period from 1990 up to 2100 on an average. The average temperature of the earth is at the moment around 14 degrees Celsius, and this really implies that in a millennium, although the temperatures did not rise, it is expected in the next century the temperatures are going to rise extremely fast, and this is the crux of climate change. Next, we will discuss Annex 1 parties, which is a part of the Kyoto Protocol. Industrialized countries which are committed to return to their GHG emission levels of 1990 by the year 2000 would have to accept the emission targets for the period from 2008 to 2012 in accordance with Article 3 and Annex B of the Kyoto Protocol. They include the European Union, the 24 original OECD members, and 14 countries whose economies are in transition. These countries are Liechtenstein, Croatia, Slovenia, Monaco, and so on. These joined later and they are mentioned in the Annex 1. Now, Annex 2 parties, these Annex 2 parties involve the European Union and the 24 original OSCE members. These countries are entrusted with a special obligation to provide financial resources and to transfer cleaner technologies to developing countries. Non-Annex 1 parties, developing countries are not expected to decarbonize their economies unless provided with funds and technology by the developed countries. So this is the gist of the Kyoto Protocol. These developing countries that have been identified by the world community include the major developing countries and the less developed countries, majority of them recognized as being susceptible to the unfavorable climate change, which comprises of those prone to desertification or drought, and those with low-lying coastal areas would be affected when the polar caps melt, then the sea level is likely to rise. So these countries are likely to be affected. The countries heavily dependent upon revenue from fossil fuel production are also included in this list. China and India and other developing countries did not face any numerical limitation as stated in the Kyoto Protocol, because during the pre-treaty industrialization period they were not the key contributors to the emission of greenhouse gases. Nevertheless, as per the Kyoto target, even no commitment to reduction in the emissions, the common liability of these countries is to cooperate with the decreasing the emissions that exist. A mechanism of compliance, which essentially means monitoring compliance amidst the commitments and penalties for non-compliance, are designed as per the protocol. Now let us study the mechanism for GHG emission abatement under the Kyoto Protocol. There are three mechanisms. The first mechanism is known as the joint implementation mechanism. Now this allows for countries to claim credit for emission reduction that arises from investment in other industrially advanced countries, which result in a transfer of emission reduction units between countries. This facilitates advanced countries to invest in projects that are climate friendly in other industrialized nations, and thereby they earn what are called carbon credits. The other mechanism, the second mechanism, is known as CDM, that is Clean Development Mechanism, through which industrialized countries can finance mitigation projects in developing countries, contributing to their sustainable development. This enables the industrialized advanced countries to invest in climate friendly schemes in the poor nations, and they themselves are able to earn carbon credits. And the third mechanism is known as International Emission Trading, IET. This allows nations to transfer a portion of their allowed emissions. There are certain assigned amounts of units, and to form a market whereby the carbon credits could be traded along with other nations that have crossed their target, facilitating sovereign trading. All these mechanisms are market-based ones. The first two are project-based, whereas the third one allows for the developed countries to sell the surplus emission of one country to another developed country. The first commitment period in this respect is from 2008 to 2012. Now, let us talk about this important development called carbon trading. In a nutshell, carbon trading has been expressed by Richard Sander, the research professor at Kellogg Graduate School of Management, Northwest University, United States, and he is considered to be the father of the concept of carbon trading. It is designated as CCX. To save our environment from further degradation, a unique trading system was proposed. The entities who undertake a project to reduce pollution levels become eligible for selling the amount of GHG emissions saved as a carbon credit. One carbon credit has been defined as 1 ton of CO2 emissions saved. All greenhouse gas emissions are calculated in terms of CO2, that is the equivalent in metric tons of CO2 emitted. So, the CO2 emission certificate is either a GHG emission allowance, cap and trade system, or a verified GHG reduction in emissions, baseline and credit system. In various international and national schemes, the CO2e certificates are tradable. Trading may either be voluntary or based on a mandatory regime. Now, we will move on to the discussion on the assessment of the three mechanisms that we have just studied. CDM was one of the most promising mechanisms facilitating benefits of two kinds. One, of curbing emissions and assisting the development of non-Annex 1 countries. The inadequacies concerning its operations and the lack of ability in delivering lower emissions at a reasonable cost have been pointed out by experts. Many pre-approved project registrations have been delayed due to the bureaucracy and the wide-ranging entanglement and red tape. Many of the critics blame that CDM has actually earned many companies plenty of carbon credits for quite a low cost change, indicating that the other means of financing emission reduction or the national regulation would have been a better option. The critics blame that China, at the expense of other developing nations, has captured a large number of CERs, which are the certified emission reductions. Nonetheless, this substantial involvement might further boost renewable sector in the country, providing ancillary benefits in the long run. Even though the COP17 failed to resolve all of the related concerns, yet it did extend the CDM. These concerns have not yet been resolved in the COP17, but the CDM has been extended to comprise carbon capture storage projects, which is supported by the private sector. Similarly, emission trading developed in the framework of EU is fraught with criticism. Carbon markets continue to be in their infancy and burdened with the challenges such as its exposure to political risk, discovery of price and instability in prices, and so on. It is argued that the carbon prices are too low to sustain most profitable opportunities. Also, the unstable and unregulated capital markets cannot provide a foundation for the global efforts against climate change, and this is the argument of the environmental activists. Now, if we should study the UNFCCC emission reporting, the UNFCCC is the supreme body, and its conference of parties, the COP, is the supreme force which is behind this entire move towards controlling and mitigating climate change. So far, 18 COPs have been convened. The major ones are Copenhagen Accord and the COP17 of Durban platform for enhanced action. Vital to the intergovernmental process of the COP is its ability to prepare, share, communicate and act in response to the information through national communiques and greenhouse gas inventory reporting. Communications of this type provide the means by which COP supervises and monitors progress achieved by the parties in fulfilling their commitments and in attaining the convention's eventual objectives. A reduction in the emissions to bind the rise in global temperatures by 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 2 degrees Celsius was the call of the IPCC. However, the leaders at the Cancun and the Copenhagen conventions have made use of these figures to decide their mitigation pledges. However, in the absence of pertinent action on climate change, the current escalation in the emissions will lead to a 9 degree Fahrenheit or a 5 degree Celsius average increase in global temperatures as per a recent analysis by Climate Interactive Scoreboard. Now we come to the COP17 of Durban. Many climate change experts were anxious that the Kyoto Protocol would end in 2012 with no subsequent secondary legal binding agreement. This would actually lead to the continued increase in the global emissions. However, this concern was to some extent moderated by almost 200 countries at the COP17 who agreed upon an extension of the protocol right up to 2017 and further up to 2020. The delegates who envisaged a new accord that would include GHG targets for all countries, notwithstanding their level of economic development, which is in contrast to the Kyoto Protocol that is focused on emission reductions originating only from developed countries. It was decided to draft a Kyoto Protocol successor by 2015 that would come into force finally in 2020. In the face of these successes, the apparent absence of leadership of the central players in the debate, particularly USA, has drawn increasing concern about the long-run prospect of the rules governing global climate change. In addition, on the basis of domestic economic concerns, on the basis of such concerns, and also on the basis of the world's top GHG emitters' refusal to ratify the accord, Canada's decision to pull out from the Kyoto Protocol generated the fear of the collapse of the entire accord. These issues were converted into the agenda for the Qatar summit in November 2012 called COP18. Now, let us understand COP18, which was held at Doha in Qatar. Doha opened a new gateway to greater action and a bigger hope, and this was known as the Doha Climate Change Gateway. The amendments which came about to the Kyoto Protocol were the following. The Kyoto Protocol was the only prevailing and binding agreement on the basis of which the developed countries committed to a reduction of greenhouse gases. This was finally amended to go on with up to 1st January 2013. Governments decided 8 years to be the length of the second commitment period, and valuable rules for accounting of the protocol have been preserved. The countries taking further commitment agreed to review the increased levels of emission reduction commitments latest by 2014. Australia, the EU, Monaco, Liechtenstein, Japan and Switzerland declared that they would not carry over any excess or surplus emission trading credits, that is the assigned amounts, into the next phase, that is the second commitment period of Kyoto Protocol. The timetable for the 2015 Global Climate Change Agreement was also discussed and agreed. The governments decided to swiftly work towards a worldwide climate change accord to be adopted by 2015 and a run-up up to 2020, covering all countries, and to discover ways to size up efforts before 2020 beyond the existing pledges to restrain emissions at the global level in order to remain under the approved maximum of 2 degrees Celsius rise in temperature per annum. Now, the completion of the innovative infrastructure. In Doha, this aspect was also discussed. The governments considerably advanced the conclusion of a new infrastructure to conduit the finance and technology to developing nations and approach towards its full operation and implementation. For locating the Green Climate Fund and also for working on the plan of the Standing Committee on Finance, Republic of Korea was chosen as the center. In the second half of 2013, the Green Climate Fund was to start its work in Sondgo. UNEP-led, United Nations Environmental Programme-led consortium as a host of the Climate Technology Center would support it for the initial 5 years, and this was the decision that was taken. The Climate Technology Center CTC with its allied network was the executive arm of the UNFCCC technology mechanism. Now, the long-term climate finance. Once again, the long-term climate finance was discussed. The developed countries had restated their pledge to deliver on promise to carry on with the long-term climate finance assistance to developing economies with a vision to mobilize 100 billion US dollars for adaptation and mitigation mechanisms by 2020. Germany and the UK, Denmark, France, Sweden and the EU Commission, the European Commission, announced actual financial pledges in the Doha round up to 2015, amounting to approximately 6 billion US dollars. Moving to the other coping strategy initiatives, let us first consider the first one is Short-Lived Pollutants Coalition was launched in February 2012. The US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton on February 16, 2012 announced the formation of a global coalition comprising of United States, Mexico, Sweden, Canada, Ghana and Bangladesh to focus and target the so-called short-lived pollutants in the climate. The primary objective of the coalition, known as the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, was to combat pollutants like hydrofluorocarbons, methane, black carbon which is known as soot, and the only ones that remain in the atmosphere for a short time nonetheless play a major role in impacting climate change and negatively affecting the public health. Though the coalition has not hitherto given the full mandate, but it would finance the problem to the tune of $15 to $20 million contributed by the United States, and will work towards the objectives of the United Nations Environment Programme in synchronization with the United Nations. The second was the Reform, Refresh and Renew by the CDM. Too many non-additional projects, those who might have decreased emissions even without the CDM, were approved. Others say that the process of project approval is too rigorous. It is also said that since CDM has no legal life post Kyoto, it will not succeed bring about a long-lasting result. On various occasions, these criticisms have been aired. CDM necessarily needs to be reformed and should focus on the activities of the least developed countries that are conclusively additional. Focus should be on sector-based trading for other nations, and this would have permitted credit for sectors that beat ambitious stipulated baselines without finding them for exceeding the baselines. Simultaneously, the UNFCCC was required to work on streamlining the CDM process of approval. Preferably, the CDM bureaucratic mechanism could be significantly reduced if the governance of CDM was located more in the countries that were providing the funds. A fresh announcement of CDM's reform in the consultation process of 1 year and the decision of COP17 Durban to formally take in carbon capture storage projects in CDM are an important first step, though the two must be followed by a definite policy action to maintain the economic relevance and the sustainability of the CDM. The third, enhanced role of World Bank. Institutions that support economic development at the global level have a large prospective role in encouraging low carbon growth and adjustment and adaptation to the climate change. World Bank with the support of regional development banks, has distinctive ability to mobilize huge capital for investments that will be necessary in the infrastructure of low carbon. Many UN organizations such as the United Nations Environment Programme and the UNDP, the United Nations Development Programme, are short of the capability to take care of such big infrastructural projects. However, they have a major job in constructing the significant capacity in developing nations. These organizations would gain from apparent strategies for supporting climate change and increasing the related finance. More controversially, they might also encourage shifts in policy through conditionalities on their assistance. For instance, the World Bank may specify aid and assistance in increasing the energy supply on measures to moderate demand through reforms in subsidy. These steps would be tough politically but would not be unprecedented. Lastly, C40 cities climate leadership group. The mayors from C40 cities, a group of over 50 mega cities around the world working to fight climate change, met on June 19th in Rio and it was called the Rio Plus C40 Mega City Mayors Taking Action on Climate Change. World Cities Leadership Climate Change Summit was founded after October 2005, where the C40 had expanded to include 58 mega cities from around the globe. The C40 cities has not only partnered with enterprises like the Clinton Climate Initiative, but also lately announced a new partnership with Clean Air Coalition to improve cities' waste management through other drives. The organization approximates that the 4,734 measures it has taken to combat climate change would reduce greenhouse emissions by over 1 billion tons by 2030. Now let us discuss the Indian position with respect to carbon credits. There are no emission targets for India as it is a developing country. However, India is switching to the CDM mechanism projects and there is enough scope to gain from carbon credits. Polluting industries in the country which are targeting to lessen emissions and in exchange receive carbon credits and earn money include power generation, steel, cement, fertilizer, chemical plants, plantation companies, waste disposable units, sugar companies and municipal corporations. Companies are investing in windmills, biodiesel, biogas and cogeneration to earn carbon credits for selling these to the developed countries in the carbon credits market internationally. The benefits accruing to Indian companies would be in terms of the sophisticated technological improvement and the interrelated foreign investment. 2. The greenhouse gas reduction by taking up alternative sources of energy. And 3. The sale of CERs to developed countries would generate income for India. Now let us talk about the trading of CERs. A project that is worth mentioning over here is the Delhi Metro Rail Corporation, the DMRC. It was the first rail project to have earned carbon credits because its rolling stock uses regenerative braking systems. DMRC has earned carbon credits since this technology reduces 30% of the electrical consumption, which has resulted in a claim of 400,000 CERs starting from December 2007, when the project was indexed by the UNFCCC for a period of 10 years of credit. This converts to rupees 1.2 crores every year for the next 10 years. India accounts for the largest number of CDM projects registered and ranks number 2 for supplying the maximum number of CER units. In addition, there are 2 commodity exchanges that are trading carbon credits. Hence, a promising trading platform offering a better price for CERs is available to Indian companies. The MCX, or the Multi Commodity Exchange, is India's largest commodity exchange that has started futures trading in carbon credits as well. On 11th April 2008, the NCDX, that is the National Commodity and Derivative Exchange, also initiated the futures contracts in carbon trading in December 2008. After studying the Indian carbon credits, let us now understand the contemporary key technologies for mitigation that are commercially available. Destruction of successful local agricultural systems and turning it into radical, wasteful industrial agricultural corporations is definitely risking the planetary health. Moving away from industrial food systems dependent on intensive use of chemicals, fossil fuels and water towards a model based on ecologically sustainable traditional practices is certainly desirable for containing climate change, for maintaining biodiversity, for making certain food security, for preservation of wildlife and other species, and to protect our soil, air and water. Energy supply is another important dimension. For improvement in the supply and distribution of the energy and its efficiency, this could be one source of mitigation. Okay. Then we have nuclear power, which is environmentally friendly, fuels, that is switching from coal to gas, then renewable heat and power to solar and hydropower, wind energy, geothermal energy and bioenergy, and all these applications are things which would help in carbon capture and storage, that is the storage of removed CO2 from natural gas, combined heat and power. Buildings, the efficient use of lighting and daylighting, switching to efficient electrical appliances and cooling and heating devices, improved insulation, cooking stoves and active passive solar designs for both cooling and heating, and more of use of alternative refrigeration fluids rather than the CFCs, and the recovery and recycling of fluorinated gases. These are all measures which would help in the process of climate change mitigation. Transportation, vehicles with greater fuel efficiency and cleaner diesel vehicles, hybrid vehicles and biofuel are some of the possible changes that need to be brought about. Switching from personal road transport to public transport systems and rail, increased non-monetized road transport like cycling, walking and so on, improved land use and transport planning again would go a long way in mitigating climate change. Then industry, more efficient end use of electrical equipment and gadgets, improved power and heat recovery, control of non-CO2 gas emissions, material recycling and substitution, and a broad range of process technologies in industry would also help in this respect. In terms of forestry, improved afforestation, that is the establishment of new forests by seeding or planting on non-forested land, and reforestation, that is reduction in deforestation. Also forest management, that is the management of harvested wood products to replace fossil fuels of forestry products for bioenergy. Apart from all of this, we have agriculture. In agriculture, improved or better crop and grazing land management to add to soil carbon storage, to improve rice cultivation techniques, restoration of cultivated peat soils and degraded lands, and livestock and manure management to decrease the methane emission. Also, the dedicated energy crops to replace fossil fuel use. The use of improved nitrogen fertilizer application techniques to reduce the NO2 emissions and to improve energy efficiency. All of these measures also are important in this respect. Waste management, increased landfill methane recovery, organic waste composting, controlled treatment of wastewater, waste incineration with energy recovery, recycling and the minimization of waste. Let us now discuss the climate change engineering in detail. A pioneering paper by Eric Beckel and Lee Lane, the first comprehensive reading on cost-benefit analysis of climate engineering, points out, they offer a convincing evidence that a small investment in climate engineering might reduce as much of the effects of global warming to the tune of trillions of dollars spent on reduction of carbon emissions. The advantage of climate engineering is in its speed. There is a considerable delay between carbon cuts and drop in the temperature. Even if the global emissions are halved by the mid-century, it would hardly be measurable by the turn of this century. The availability of cheap green energy will take a long time. It is important to notice that the electrification of the global economy is yet unfinished after more than a century's effort. Some methods of atmospheric engineering. Solar radiation management. Atmospheric greenhouse gases allow sunlight to pass but absorb the heat and then radiate a portion to the surface of the earth. Other things being the same, more concentration of warms up the planet on the earth, the greater the concentration. Management of solar radiation would rebound a portion of the sunlight back into space, thereby reflecting 1 to 2% of the entire sunlight that is striking the earth and offsetting as much as warming caused by the doubling levels of greenhouse gases during the pre-industrial times. Marine cloud whitening. This is a mechanism by which we spray seawater droplets into the marine clouds, which makes them reflect the extra sunlight. This enhances the natural cores where the ocean's sea salt offer water vapor with the cloud condensation nuclei. However, it is remarkable to consider that cancelling out centuries of global warming by spraying seawater mist into the air to thicken clouds by 1900 unmanned ships is possible. Stratospheric aerosol insertion. Owing to the eruption of Mount Pinatubo in 1991, around 1 million tons of sulfur dioxide was pumped into the stratospheric layer, reacting with the water and leading to a formation of a hazy layer spreading around the globe, and by way of scattering and absorbing the sunlight, it cooled the Earth's surface for nearly 2 years. This effect created through the stratospheric aerosol insertion, which is essentially launching material like soot or sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere, can be mimicked. Risk of climate change engineering. Marine cloud whitening would not lead to permanent changes in the atmosphere and could only be used when required. It is a natural process and it would turn the seawater into clouds. The biggest dispute is the people's perception. Several environmental lobbyists are against even researching the climate engineering, and climate engineering could be an option only in the case of extreme necessity. We are a generation that has wasted decades in bickering over carbon emissions cuts to be achieved and miserably failed to stop the harmful effects of warming. This disgraceful legacy can be avoided by rethinking, redesigning the climate change policy. To limit carbon pricing initially to a low tax as low as $5 per ton, to fund energy R&D is the proposal of Green and Galania,